In this latest Microdose Pro Podcast episode, I would like to introduce you to Djai Baaten. He is our resident clinical director, psychologist, and neuropsychologist. This was a wonderful opportunity to unpack all things psychedelic, all things microdosing, and even delve into the lesser broached topic of ethics within the psychedelic industry. I'm pretty sure you'll find him to be warm, funny, insightful, and wise, and that perhaps this episode might even give you some food for thought. Let me know what you think in the comments below. So this is fun. We've been looking forward to doing this. We did the trilogy with the founders, and now, of course, you were the appropriate one next in line. And I'm going to start with a bit of a layered question, and I think it's going to set the groundwork. We only just met a few months ago at our first team building after working together almost 2 years already. And for me, I almost forgot that we hadn't physically met because you seemed like so familiar. But then as the days wore on, I was very surprised at what I was learning about you. And so even though you felt so familiar, you were like this box of very adventurous and wondrous things that kept surprising me. And so my layered question to you is, what would you say is the most interesting thing about you? And then throughout that, you can explain how you fit into the whole Microdose Pro equation and your medical background.
Wow, that's a big question. First of all, I should thank you, because to me that's a beautiful compliment that you just gave me. But yeah, the most interesting thing about me, I wouldn't know per se. I think I'm hard to put into one category.
Yes.
I think that's one of the things that I actually quite like about myself, is that I have done lots of different things spanning completely different domains, as we said in the podcast with the Christmas podcast, right? Where I could surprise everybody by letting them know that I'm actually a qualified security guard in the Netherlands as well, aside from the things that I do academically. And
yes, well, you are quite the shapeshifter because you do the academic side so well, and maybe you can talk a little bit about that. And then you shapeshift into your other, not even hobbies, but actual skills. And then you shapeshift into your actual hobbies. And we've got ourselves quite the equation before us. So tell me a little bit. Let's start first with your medical background. How did you end up as let me brag for you a little bit. Tell me if I'm wrong. Double master's, neuroscientist, neuropsychologist, practicing, and our very own clinical director.
Yeah, well, it's officially not medical, because for that you have to have followed medical school. But yeah, my background is in psychology, and I've done a bachelor's degrees in psychology with a minor towards neuropsychology. After that, I did a master's in clinical neuropsychology, and when I was about to finish that master, I decided that I wanted to continue my education. So I opted to do another year of studying, which was quite a difficult choice, to be honest, because I wasn't really looking forward to also another year of working really hard and not having any money to spend, which was the case for me. But still, I did it, and I did another, like a second master's degree in clinical psychology. So the neuropsychology really focuses on everything with the brain and behavior. a large part of the focus of neuropsychology of the master's degree that I followed was actually on brain damage and dementias and what we call neurodevelopmental disorders. So that's autism, Tourette's, ADHD, uh, all that. And while I was doing this master's, I found out that I wasn't really looking forward to working in a hospital, seeing people with brain damage and assessing them for cognitive functioning. Or the other side that was most likely for me was to work in a care home for people who were suffering from cognitive decline and to map out the specifics, sorts of decline that there are and what this person would be suffering of. I felt like that would be work that wouldn't really make me happy. And I did my master thesis on the expression of psychosis and schizophrenia, and more specifically, the effects of a new kind of treatment on the brain. So the question was, can we see changes, like positive changes in symptoms after this treatment, and can we link those changes to changes in the brain? And I love doing that so much and having the interviews with the people there, with the patients, that I felt like, okay, I think I should go more towards the therapy side of psychology. And that's when I knew that I wanted to do the clinical master. Yeah.
Nice, nice. That's no, it's your contribution is obviously invaluable, and as I joke, you're the yin to my yang because I'm not nearly as trained as you are, and I think that lays the groundwork for some potentially really interesting debates, hopefully, which we'll get through. We'll
Fingers
talk about
crossed.
a few things, but one of
Yeah.
fingers crossed, fingers crossed. Um, and one of the things that I was always curious to ask you, but the opportunity hadn't arisen yet because one of your skill sets is to build stages for rock bands, which is the most rock star thing ever. So that's like, meanwhile, sidebar, neuroscience aside, there you are doing the thing. And that offers you the opportunity to have such a wide macro view and distinct view on humanity and people and how they are, both in a formal setting, both in an academic setting, and both, the traveling crew members, and then the whole concert scene and everything that that means, and the herd mentality from
Mhm.
audiences, and so on and so forth. And my question to you is there anything that you've come to understand about the human condition that you kind of look at everyone and kind of go, I don't know, like, how do you see the human condition, in this 21st century? I mean, things are tough. It's 2023. We've all had our collective snow globe shaken in the last
Mhm.
few years. And I'm wondering if you sometimes say to yourself, I wish people knew this about themselves.
I've done actually a lot. I wish people knew this about themselves. um, so yeah, uh, I work as a therapist still. Like this is what I do the majority of my time: seeing clients, doing one-to-one therapy, and also group therapy with the retreats that I offer. I think we'll touch on that later. But I think for me, one of the more important things is if you go to study, then there's you only get to meet a really small sliver of society, right? You get to meet the people who are,
Mm,
I don't know, interested in studying, interested in moving out from their parents' home, going to do things by themselves. Usually people with money, or whose families have money, um, and that creates a kind of narrow view. And I think one of the things that I've been noticing from hopping through different domains is that I'd say my personal bubble is all people who are quite um, aware of what's going on, aware of how to read the news in a critical sense or in a critical way, aware of their traps, their shortcomings every now and then we expect the entire world to be like that. But for so many people, there's not the space to focus on those kind of things more related to personal development, I guess, because they are struggling way more with just getting by. And I think, for me at least, it's very important to always be empathetic towards towards that fact that there's so many people who are really their main focus is to get by. One of the things that I mean, for example, is that one thing that I often saw while traveling is that if you go to poorer regions, people don't take care of nature. Like you find plastic just thrown around everywhere, and nobody seems to care. And in fact, I mean, these people they probably don't care because they don't have any fucks to give towards that end of the spectrum. They're basically trying to make sure there's food on the table and shelter above their head. And I think that if we could collectively show a bit more empathy towards that, then we'd find a lot more understanding towards other people and where they're coming from. And I think through understanding, we can work towards solutions instead of saying they should be better.
It's really something to meet people where they are and then to practice the whole live and let live. I mean, it sounds nice and, but it's like, okay, try it out for a while.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah,
work.
yeah.
It's
True,
work.
true. Yeah,
And I suppose that's where psychedelics or psilocybin comes in, because psilocybin does provide kind of that softness, both for the perceiver and both for the taker or the user. There's something about psilocybin that makes us feel, and Nils rolls his eyes when I say things like this, but there's something about psilocybin that makes us feel like the universe has our back and we're not just falling through space. And that alone turns down the volume on the fight or flight, and the amygdala is not like going crazy. And so you actually have bandwidth to be resilient, maybe anti-fragile. You can cope through your day. You're not red zoning. And then from the viewer's point of view, somebody outside looking in, they'll be like, it's easier to really meet someone where they are. And so I wonder what has brought you to microdosing and to this whole, I mean, somewhere between the stages and the school books, you ended up with us.
yeah,
Another set of
yeah.
riffraff.
Well, yeah. I think it started um, when I first read about um, MDMA. So there were some really new studies being done about like looking into the use of MDMA in psychoassisted psychotherapy for PTSD specifically. And oh, hello, Robert. Come on. Yeah.
Right on cue. Very good.
Wanted to say hi. So um, I think it started with Niels can cut this out with the kitty. I think it started with I'm not quite sure actually which was first, whether it was the studies into MDMA assisted psychotherapy for PTSD, which showed like really good results. Especially the first study that they published, they used only people with treatment resistant PTSD. So people who had the diagnosis of PTSD, who had tried multiple different sorts of both psychotherapy as well as medical interventions. So different types of medicines that were used, and found no proper relief from all those different interventions. And for this group, I believe the remission rate, so the part of the test group that was without a diagnosis, was like 50% after a 2 or 3 month treatment treatment plan. And the funny thing was that on the follow up, so like 6 months after they ended treatment, they found that an additional group also recovered. So the effects of the treatment kept on building even though treatment had stopped. That was huge for me when I read that, because I was writing my thesis also on PTSD, and we know that there's a large proportion of people with PTSD who don't see proper improvement after the the therapy that we normally use. At the same time, while I was studying psychology, I had my first psychedelic experience, and that was really special as well. Like I really experienced being able to think outside the box, come to different conclusions on already existing problems that I had, and afterwards felt like, wow, I've worked through a few problems, and that actually went so smooth. It was so easy to take a different perspective from what I normally do, that I can completely see how, in a therapy setting, this could be very helpful to help people gain different understandings on the stuff that they're struggling with. So that's when I started reading a lot about it. I think the first book I read was The Psychedelic Renaissance, written by Ben Sessa. Really lovely read. And from there on, it was yeah, it was even before Michael Pollan released his book. And yeah, I got more and more convinced on it. I had some more experiences myself, which was really insightful every time. I had some more of my own experiences, and after a very special experience where I was guided by someone on a psilocybin journey, I realized, like, yes, okay, I would like to spend some more of my time actively working on psychedelics, as in, just giving some of my time towards the greater good and seeing if I can do anything to help advance the well the whole field of psychedelic studies. So that's when I joined Open Foundation. They are based in Amsterdam. They're a non-profit that spend their time. Well, when I arrived, it was more still focused on getting research off the ground. There's not so much need for that anymore, because research is already up and running a lot. But yeah, the Open Foundation is very much focused on the academic side of psychedelics, and with them, for them, I helped organize a conference, the Interdisciplinary Conference on Psychedelic Research, and yeah, that was in 2020, and I started there in 2019, I think, and yeah, gradually fell and stumbled into the position of general manager at the conference, which was also a really lovely new experience, like managing a team of 40 volunteers with no previous experience on how to do any of that. Was very interesting, very very insightful as well. Yeah, and while I was doing that, I was completely submerged uh, in the whole psychedelic field and everything that was going on. And at the same time, there were Kai, Niels, and Gino who were starting Microdose Pro. And I think I think like 2 or 3 months after they started, I met up with Kai and we started talking about Microdose Pro and about. I had some questions, of course, about hey, you know, I know that you guys do it for productivity, but do you get any people that do it for, I don't know, depression, anxiety, for mental health? And they said, yeah, actually, quite a lot. And we started talking about what they would do if they had any questions, these customers of theirs. And they said, well, actually, we don't quite know yet. This is all new to us. So that's how I got involved. I sat down with Niels and Gino and Kai, told them, oh, we had a conversation. Basically, said, hey, wouldn't it be wise to work together? If there's any clients that need extra support, then I can be that person. And that's where it all started.
So I like to connect the dots between the words we hear every day and our everyday experiences, and sometimes that can fall between the cracks. And the term PTSD is heard quite a lot, and the way I visualize it in my mind is that it's a state of shock that the body goes through, whatever the reason. It might be chemical from all the adrenaline and the cortisol, it might be emotional, it's all sorts of things, and it kind of gets locked in that shock state. So if you look at heart rate variability, for example, ideally you have this curve, and the higher the high and the lower the low, the wider the range of heart rate variability, the better the predictor for overall health is. And conversely, when we're in shock or dealing with PTSD, it seems to be like spikes and a plateau and a crash and a plateau rather than that beautiful curve. And as you were talking that, psychedelics allows you to really take on another perspective very easily, the visual I get is kind of like the small shift that you make on train tracks, and if you kind of use the train tracks as an analogy for synapses and how it works on neurogenesis and neuroplasticity, there's something about these specific type of psychedelics that kind of it just kind of pushes the track over, and you've got a connection that was almost inconceivable previously, and now it becomes almost effortless.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
yeah, I agree with you, but I want to add something that I think should not be underestimated, and that is that all of these um, studies that are being done, like the ones that show true potential, are the ones where a psychedelic experience is embedded within a therapeutic context. So there is a container for this experience, right? It's more than just a like you take a substance, it gives you a nudge in the right direction, and you're off on your own, and you can make it. Like I think even the studies that have been done this way, there were a few, I think, in 2017 in London at the uh, yeah, at the university in London, where they gave a group of depressed patients a high dose of psilocybin, and what they found was that this was treatment-resistant depression as well. What they found was that directly after the experience, depressive symptoms had lifted. There was a significant improvement for these people in their day to day. But what they also found was that within 3 months, the majority of them were back to baseline, feeling completely depressed again. Right. So I think that's a really good example of, psychedelics kind of make you a bit more moldable, a bit more flexible, but you have to put that to good use. And you have to do that within the right container, with the right intentions. Otherwise, you probably won't reap the benefits of it.
Absolutely. And this is one of the bugbears that I have, and I have a few. But one of them is there's so much emphasis on set and setting, which of course has its place. Now, the set and setting can be, the shaman and the journey and the whatever, or it can be in a clinical space. They both have the pros and cons, I would imagine, but they're both quite distinct in their own way. But there is space being held and there is intent and the set and setting. But especially in my experience of quote unquote ceremonies, integration is never spoken of. It's not like the shaman is going to call you in 3 weeks and go, "How are you doing?" Jack Cornfield wrote that beautiful book, After the Ecstasy, the Laundry. It's like, how are you coping with the mundane Tuesday
Mhm.
morning in traffic after you had a cup of tea with Jesus and you didn't tell your partner?
Yeah.
How are you doing?
Yeah. Well, this is a really big discussion, right? Especially because, um, yeah, I think this is where it goes wrong often. I really,
Because it's setting integration.
yeah,
Like this.
yeah, right. I think that there's many people who guide other people through a psychedelic experience, and they're really apt at it. Like they're really good space holders, for example. But it's way more than just the experience, right? You need the
That's
integration,
the first part.
but you not the
The
first part.
experience is
Even
the first
not the first part is the preparation. Even like, why are you coming here? You can expect people to do the work themselves, but so often they don't, or they don't do it properly. Like, so difficult to start doing work by yourself. And don't say that you necessarily need a a certified psychologist to do that for you. And there can be many other people with skill sets that don't involve a university degree. But I would, hope that these people are trained in some way that gives them at least some skill in working with people, in seeing, you know, having an eye for contraindications, for example, reasons for not doing it, not giving people a psychedelic experience, or just in general being able to feel out how someone doing, what will be helpful for this
what to
person
do in a
instead of,
bad trip,
sorry.
you know, and what to do in a bad trip. I mean, a large dose does not guarantee the sublime. It could be the sublime or the savage.
Yeah.
And when you're in it, you need someone that knows how to handle you, because you won't necessarily know how to handle you in that
Yeah,
moment.
yeah. I just forgot where I read this, but I think yesterday I stumbled upon some article that made exactly this point. Like, this was by someone who did a lot of, had a lot of guided experiences, and was a guide, him or herself, and they talked about, how people often come to them and say, "Hey, I'm ready for this heroic dose. I want you to give me as much as you probably as much as you can give me. Like, I want to have the experience." And I think that's very dangerous. And I think that, um, that sometimes if you have someone who might not be fully aware of the substances that they're working with, or are completely enchanted by the substances that they're working with, that they might think like, okay, well, if the person feels like this is what they need, then the medicine probably tells them this is what they need, and then they give it to them with all consequences afterwards, right? Because that is not necessarily a good thing. And I think more often than not, it's a bad thing.
It is. It really is learning how to manipulate fire. And fire is very useful, and it obviously helped our species in so many ways. Once we figured out how to have fire, then we could cook meat, and then, that whole cascade of how it
Mm.
impacted our brain size, blah, blah, blah. And you can burn the forest down.
Yeah,
So, so
exactly.
do
But
you
yeah,
know
I
how to
mean,
handle fire?
what happens with this entire discussion is, um, what's happening right now is that there is a medicalization of psychedelics, in a sense, right? Not everywhere, but definitely in the way that psychedelics are being studied right now is almost exclusively in relationship to psychological issues, such as post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, eating disorders, anxiety, near-death anxiety or depression, you name it, right? Everything that is a burden for people right now is being researched. Like, can we use psychedelics to help these people? Which is great, because by doing this, we learn a lot about psychedelics. We get a chance to use really advanced technological insights, right? To see what happens actually, what does happen in the brain when people take a psychedelic, and what happens after they've taken it, and what happens to a depressed brain in comparison to a healthy brain. Um, But there's one thing that I'm a little bit scared of, and that's the following. That is that we are going to come towards an acceptance of psychedelics as a useful substance, or as, we basically give it this respect that it earns, because it can do a lot of good. But then we're gonna kind of gatekeep that and say this is only for those who really need it. So you can only, we will give you psychedelics, and we will make it legal, and we will give it to you, but only if you are very depressed and have tried everything and it's not working.
And are willing to spend $15,000.
Well, well, yeah. I mean, in the Netherlands, we get most of our care paid for by our health insurances. So, like, the things that I get what you say. I think the people that I'm talking about, they won't have to pay it out of pocket, probably. Right? They will get the health insurance to pay it, but only under strict circumstances. And I would, well, my little utopia would have at least some place for psychedelics for the general population. If you feel like you want to have a psychedelic experience, that you can find someone who is trained, who is, skilled in this regard, who can give you preparation and integration and be there with you for a psychedelic experience. If you want to use this for personal development, for example. But I think this is a risk if we go only towards like medicalization of psychedelics, that we are going to lose this part of psychedelics, and that part will stay underground with, well, the self-proclaimed healers and shamans who will be there as space holders but won't be there if you fall apart afterwards.
Yeah, and also, like, not only that, um pathologizing and diagnosing, you're not worthy unless you have a diagnosis. You can't have access, to such an experience without being pathologized in some way, is one issue. But then, of course, the extractions, the synthesizations, the patents, you
Yeah.
know, like, to be honest, I mean, microdosing is not necessarily a money making thing. You're not microdosing every day. You're doing it for a few weeks. You take a break, and the break can be a year long. Like, you don't know. I mean, you might
Hmm.
just microdose for 6 weeks in the entire year. It's not exactly a bankrolling business plan,
No.
So if big pharma is going to go in there and they're going to try and extract and make it non-psychoactive and do this and do the other thing, and and meanwhile we have a non-psychoactive nootropic. It's lion's mane.
Hmm.
I mean, you know, you don't need to recreate the wheel, but there's so much truncating that's happening. So you have to be
Yeah.
diagnosed, and
Yeah,
we're going to
maybe
give you a
like
pill.
I think what's happening with what you were describing is that we are taking, not we, but certain companies are taking a solution that they know to something new, and it begs the question: is this going to be a fit? Right? Is there going to be a way to make um, psychedelic assisted psychotherapy a profitable enterprise? It's a big question mark for me. There's many enterprises, many companies that have already tried to do so and have gone bankrupt. Look at Field Trip in the Netherlands. Look at Synthesis, for example. These were seemingly very robust companies delivering a highly sought after service. And still, even though their prices were quite high, they couldn't they couldn't grow into a financially healthy business. So,
Yes, this is a segue. I'm going to interrupt you because this is a segue into humans being human. And we often talk about the science of psychedelics and the profitability of psychedelics and the research and la la la, but it's very rare that you hear people really unpack and discuss the ethics and the moral code and the
mm,
Hippocratic oath, and my personal favorite, do no harm and take no shit. You know, it's like, synthesis and the other, they all had drama. And there's a lot of drama even last few weeks as well that we saw online from people behaving in very unevolved ways, let's just say,
mm,
and then the business goes down with it, and whether the lack of ethics is in stripping the compound, because we think we understand it better than we do, or whether the ethics revolve around thinking you're the anointed one because you're the quote unquote CEO slash shaman, like that one article that we read in the group Slack, that he thought he was special because he was the top dog. That whole range, when somebody is so vulnerable under the influence of psychedelics, whether you're microdosing or taking a hero dose, you're so open. Your heart is so open, and you're probably very desperate, especially if
mm.
you're facing a treatment resistant situation. And the ethics matter. And when are we going to start talking about that more rather than reporting the news after the fact?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah. What can I say? I want to give a
Yeah, but it's
thought
like,
through answer. I think that you're completely right, and it really pains me to see that there's people who have very negative experiences, or where a therapist abuses their position of power towards a client, or where therapists deviate from what we would deem to be ethical practices. And it pains me to see that in general, right? And it pains me also. I wouldn't even want to say even more, because it pains me equally to see that happening within a psychedelic space. Um, yeah, and I hope but this is, yeah. I wish that this wouldn't happen, and at the same time, I feel like it's kind of wishful thinking, right? You will see. I think if you are working with positions of power, then every now and then you will see these things happening. And this is in no way me trying to say, this always happens. It's not a big deal. It is a really big deal. I think it's very bad that this happens. But yeah, I wouldn't know how to stop it, honestly. Like,
well, it's one of my personal secret mandates. Jamie Wheel talks a lot about decentralizing information and not gatekeeping, and each one teach one, which is a big big deal to me. And part of that whole each one teach one that I'm so adamant about includes reminding people of their personal agency,
mhm.
and teaching them. It's like, instead of saying to your kid, don't talk to strangers, teach your kid how to maybe like deal with the stranger, how to be a little bit more street smart, and to not defer so much of authority to someone else. And this is what I try and remind people. Yes, you have a clinical director in front of you and you're in a clinical setting, or you have a shaman that's like fourth generation and he's got these massive feathers in his ears, in his hair, and everybody's like falling over to be with him. Whatever your authority figure is, you still have an intuition, you still have an instinct, you still have a choice, you still have sovereignty, and you can still call it. And that to me is the only way to deal with this.
Yes, and there is many people. There are many people around that are not in touch with this sovereignty, right? That
Yes.
don't have a very well developed sense of safety, of what is safe and what isn't, or there's so many people who wouldn't be able to see certain red flags, even though it's being waved right in front of their faces. And these are exactly the type of people that become victim of situations like this.
Yeah. I just, I'm very cautious of, as much as I understand where people are in their lives. Um, and I try and manage my expectations to not expect everybody to think or behave like me. Um, there's a beautiful term called the low bigotry of soft, of, what is it? The soft bigotry of low expectation, patronizing someone, and I really try and go from that space of, I'm not going to patronize you, but I am going to ask you to step up. Come
Hmm.
now,
Yeah.
and this is something that, I'm doing in a very subtle level. Hopefully it's subtle, but potent in all of the groups and in the communities. I think that this is really where it matters, because very much like the citizen scientists forced science to start paying attention and to confirm what we already knew were the benefits of psychoactives. They came out with all these studies. They're like, psilocybin helps with depression. And citizen scientists were like, yeah, we know. We've been trying to tell you.
Yeah.
You
James
know?
Baaten did amazing work in gathering so much anecdotal evidence that this was all about microdosing. There had been already loads of studies into higher doses, but then James Fadiman and his team they came up with such a huge amount of anecdotal evidence of people from all over the world reporting similar findings. Oh, hello, you have to check that out. There's no denying that anymore. Yeah.
No, his global survey literally changed everything and set off this momentum.
Mm.
And in the same way, I'm trying to empower a lot of people on a grassroots level to lead ethics from the inside.
Yeah, and power to you. I think that's really good.
Only try.
Yeah,
We can
yeah, yeah,
only
yeah. We
try.
can only try, right? And I think there's always this thing about, at least for me, like I would want the world to be perfect in this regard. I would really be over the moon if these weren't articles that we had to read, like abuse within the psychedelic sector. Um, I don't think it's completely avoidable. But I do think that we can do better by making it known, by the lone fact that there is actually an article on the matter, right? And that we
Yes.
share it with each other and say, hey, read this. This is horrible, right? Not because we love to feel horrible, but because we need to be aware of these things together.
And that's also why I bring it up, because it must be very isolating to have gone through an experience like that and then to not see authority figures or people in the industry discussing the fact that ethics breach does happen.
Yeah.
And so it's also just about making it a more commonplace conversation and not pretending ourselves the same way we're asking them not to pretend that it's not there.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, it's such a difficult thing. Like I feel like the psychedelics are still so controversial in a way that conversations like these are often kind of shunned because we don't want to say anything negative about it before something, some legislator decides that they need to be completely banned again. Right? And I think this is what happens within these communities. Then this would be, from my perspective, I think this is a reason for organizations to kind of wanna hush these things, right? Not make them known
Yeah,
to the entire world, which is toxic in itself, right? It's
yeah.
feeding.
I think we should go full 8 Mile, Eminem 8 Mile. You just call yourself out and
Yeah,
just spill your own secrets so
yeah,
that they can't do it for you.
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
So you shared a bunch of studies with me, and I wonder what made you, because there's a few studies. There was a video and a few studies, but I'll let you Pick one and start diving in as to why it mattered to you. Which one do you want to start with first?
Um, um, I would like to start. Okay, so the reason I sent you these specific articles was because I wanted to make a point, and the point was something that I experienced that people confront me with is that they come to me and then they say, "Hey, Jai, so I hear you're doing all this work with microdosing, but it's a placebo, right? And above, like aside from it being a placebo, have you heard about how it might be damaging to your heart?" And I wanted to address that in like I wanted to give the arguments that I usually give as a reply to people who say these things to me because I felt like that could be yeah, that will be a message that I want to bring to the world through this podcast. And
Yeah, because that Vimeo video you sent, I watched that, and it was a panel of experts, bless them. And I had notes because, again, authority figures, each one in their own right, bless their hearts. And there were terms like perhaps placebo is self perceived energy, and maybe the placebo effect is somehow linked with the intention that they had going in, and that there was the potential for it to be cardiotoxic, and and maybe even going so far as to say that the sweet spot dose is personality dependent. And I'm listening to all of these authority figures, and I'm a little shook. I'm not gonna lie.
you are. Did you
A
miss
little
the
shook.
part? Did you miss the part in this panel conversation where Amanda Fielding talks about the upcoming results that they'll be publishing, where they say that they found that microdosing psychedelics in their studies led to an improved blood flow in the brain, where they say that the blood flow in the brain is becoming more optimal, and that they hypothesized that to be the reason why many people experience an increase in energy and an increase in their capabilities to focus for longer periods of time. I love that study. Like I love the way how that alone already makes so much sense. And there's other studies that show that psychedelics, they decrease inflammation in the brain. We all know that inflammation in the brain is a hugely, I don't think we haven't even really started to grasp how massively important these kinds of markers are. Like I think that I wouldn't be surprised if we find that inflammation in the brain comes with so many different types of issues that we can encounter, that it will be concentration, sleep, regular energy throughout the day, but also mood, anxiety, all these kinds of things that could be because of some kind of inflammation in the brain. And then we can ask ourselves, like, is the inflammation the cause of it, or is it only correlation, and does it happen at the same time, or are they related to each other? But I can imagine that an improved blood flow in the brain will also help with inflammation. And we already know. Sorry, I completely took over, and I'm starting to go on a
Please,
rant.
please.
But no, I mean, you are right. There in this panel discussion from the from one of the Open Foundation webinars, because that's the one that you're talking about. Um, yeah, there are some critical notes where some of the people say like, yeah, I'm not quite sure, but the same person that says like, yeah, I don't really think that yeah, it might be placebo, also says like, yeah, I do see enough evidence to believe that this would be a good fit for ADHD. Like I wouldn't understand why you could say something like that if you really believe it only to be a placebo, right?
Yeah.
Then but yeah, also in this conversation, one of the leading experts in the field makes this remark about the cardiotoxicity. And I would love to get this out of the way because I think this is such a huge misunderstanding. Um, Let me just
I
dive
think
in.
it's to like come up with any kind of contraindication they can, and it's so funny to me because I don't know how much time you've spent in the States, for example, but you go to the States and every commercial is nearly a pharmaceutical commercial, and
Mhm.
they read off the side effects like it's nothing, and she's jumping in the field and she's smiling from ear to ear, and it may cause a whole list of very unpleasant potential situations, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah, you're right.
and it's like, that's fine, no problem, you'll be fine 100%. And then they're like, well, psychedelics, ooh, cardiovascular, and it's like,
Yeah.
really, like, tell us, educate us.
Well, first off, and maybe this is a, a kind of a defect in my own, but I do tend to try to find in everything um, the good in people. So,
Hmm.
in regards to this, I personally really want to refrain from saying that people do this on purpose. Again, in people going, because I think you're right. If you go to the States, if you take any kind of prescribed medicine, there's a bunch of side effects that can possibly harm you, and some of them are really severe. It's crazy that these are actually sold to people whenever they ask for them, and that people freak out when it comes to microdosing. Oh yeah, it might be damaging to your heart. I think that is in part, at least, again, due to people being really careful around psychedelics because they want to prevent psychedelics being banned again. So let's not do anything stupid until we're really 100% sure. I think it's more of a safety thing than a deliberate attempt to discredit microdosing.
But where do you think the misunderstanding came from? Because
Well, because
I personally.
it's quite simple. Because there have been articles written that make a link between substance A and substance B, where substance B is psilocybin, and then they make a link and say substance A causes valvular heart disease, and substance B kind of latches onto the same receptors, the 5-HT2B receptor. And because of this 5-HT2B receptor binding in psychedelics, we found that 5-HT2B receptor binding in different kinds of substances can cause valvular heart disease. So we must be very careful, and there is a chance that it leads to valvular heart disease.
Do
That's
you
the
feel it's a stretch or do you feel it's caution?
Well, I feel it's at first I thought it was caution. Let's start with that.
Okay.
If you make this link, the logical conclusion would be yes, okay, if they both bind to the same receptor, and we know that one causes valvular heart disease by binding to this specific receptor, because that is something that we do know, then yes, we should be very careful. Um, but like psilocybin is not the only substance, or LSD for that matter, or psychedelics in general, they're not the only substance that bind to this receptor. And then there's this study, the one this systematic review, the one that I sent you, um, and we should link it as well here.
Yeah,
But
I'm going to link these in the show notes, but yeah,
yeah,
continue.
that summarizes a few findings, and one of the findings that they have is that yes, psychedelics do bind to 5-HT2B receptors, but they seem to be very much in the safe range. However, there's one exception, and that's MDMA. MDMA has been shown to lead to valvular heart disease, is the conclusion of this study. So they say MDMA is also a psychedelic, it also binds to 5-HT2B receptors, so we should be very careful of all psychedelics that are being used for a prolonged period of time, like a consistent way of using it for a prolonged period of time. That's what they say. Now, I still follow up until there. But then if you dive into the Well, actually, I don't quite follow, because then you would say, well, don't take MDMA for a longer period of time in a consistent manner, because that might be.
But I mean, okay, people would, but like,
Wait, wait.
really?
So now you go into the article that has that, the one article that reported valvular heart disease in MDMA users. This is an article from 2007 from one of the universities in Belgium, and they find 29 MDMA users, like regular MDMA users, who they test for valvular heart disease, and then they find in in quite a few of them, I think it's 40% or 25%. I don't have the numbers straight right now, but they find that quite a few of them actually have valvular heart disease, which is really bad news. However, then they start to check how much these people use, and that's where it becomes absolutely incredible for me to make any comments on how MDMA would be dangerous, because they find that these people, the people who were in the group of people that had valvular heart disease, had an average use of, I have to say the right amount, but it was insane. Like, I think it's like on average 6 or 9 tablets of ecstasy, which is already a fucking strange way of putting it. Tablets of ecstasy, that doesn't really seem very robust. In how would you measure how much MDMA someone takes? But alas, it's around that, and they did that on an average of 6 years. So 6 years, 6 to 10 tablets a week. Like, that use is insane. I've been working
Who would do that?
I've been working
Who would
in
do?
addiction care for years, and I haven't met anyone who would abuse MDMA like that. It's crazy. I don't know how they find these people. And then besides that, they find that in this study, and this is not even in the discussion section where they would list, um, things that haven't been perfect in the study. They just list it in the method section. They say we don't control for poly drug use. In other words, we just found these people that use loads of MDMA and probably loads of other stuff, but we didn't really ask about that. Like, and this particular study is being cited actually as the reason why we should be careful for microdosing psilocybin 6 to 8 weeks in a
It's a
row.
stretch. It's a stretch.
That's,
Come now.
that's a long stretch. That is a long stretch. I personally, yeah, like, up until people come with better studies that show me that there's actually a risk, I will say that I don't believe that there is. Well, I have to be careful with what I say now. No, let's just keep it on. That is a very, very big stretch,
But like,
if
from
you
an
ask me.
experiential point of view, if they would have said, there's some cardiovascular issues to bear in mind about ibogaine or iboga, fine, no problem. I don't know if you have the experience with that substance. It really gets your heart rate up. Like, no joke, iboga and ibogaine gets you going.
Iboga
MDMA,
ibogaine has been shown to increase your QT time, which can lead to heart fluttering, which can lead to heart defibrillation. And if you are at a place where they don't have the right materials to assist you, you will die.
no, and in the experience, because it's also 12 hours, it's like 12 to 15 hours, it's longer than LSD, you feel it. Your heart rate is up there. Like, I've done it twice,
Hmm.
and it's like, about it. It's not like, and I didn't feel that at all under larger doses of psilocybin or MDMA. But again, MDMA is the quality of the product, right? So what are you getting? Because when you start calling it ecstasy, then that's a black box. We don't know. Are you drug
Maybe,
testing?
yeah,
What,
but- yeah,
you know?
true. But I think all of that is even besides the fact that these people use insane amounts. Like, this is not in any way comparable to the average user. Not at
No.
all. Like, this is the craziest abuse that I've ever read about. And my specialization is addiction. So I was flabbergasted when I saw these numbers. I was like, what? Are you kidding me? And then you kind of generalize these findings towards something that is not even the same substance. Like, yeah, that's and that makes me really angry, because then I feel like, come on, guys, this is I'm not a genius, right? You should be able to come to these conclusions yourself, and you're writing the article. How you must have read the 2007 study in your review. Then you must know that these are not really. To me, this really sounds um, like kind of cherry picking to write an article. Like to me, the conclusion from the article that says microdosing might be bad for your heart is actually we didn't find any conclusive evidence to say that microdosing is bad for your heart.
Yeah, and I'm like this. I'm obstinate. I'm convinced one day I might make a T-shirt that says I'm informed and still disobedient. I think that's appropriate for me. And
Yeah,
the reason I say
yeah,
that is because the thing with studies, and I've said this to you before, the observer will always affect what is being observed. This is what we learned from quantum theory, Schrodinger's cat. It is what it is. You observe it, you're going to have observer's bias, period, the end. That's just, the burden of consciousness. That
hmm.
aside, and I find that science seems to forget that a lot, but that aside, when they do have the studies, again, the editing, what doesn't get mentioned, what are the metrics, what is the data they're not talking about, what has been left behind, what hasn't been researched further. To just say there was a double blind placebo clinical trial done grants it authority, but do we really know the machinations and the actual process behind everything? Because it's easy to kind of
Well,
play, you
no,
know.
but usually academic articles don't jump to these kinds of conclusions. And
Usually.
also, to be fair, this one doesn't, right? The 2023 article doesn't say microdosing is bad for your heart. It says we need to investigate this further, right? But it gets picked up. Like, it has a title. It is, sometimes yeah, sometimes it's like that. But I don't, yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I don't think they're willingly spreading misinformation. And on the other side, right, there's many other studies that are actually quite positive. So one of the studies that I also sent you was the one that investigated the effects of microdoses of psilocybin on the brains of rats. And to me,
Mm,
this is very robust, because what they find is different kinds of things. So we know how to study rats and kind of extrapolate rat behavior to human behavior, funnily enough. So we know that, for example, when rats are stressed, they tend to wash themselves a lot. It's a typical stress response from rats.
self-soothing.
So sorry,
Self-soothing.
it's self.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, self-soothing. So we know this from rats. And what they did was they gave rats microdoses comparable to what humans would use as a microdose, and they observed them, and they saw that rats were way more stress resistant. Right? They wouldn't wash themselves as much anymore. They'd be more calm. Now, all these metrics on rat behavior to show that these rats are actually more calm and more stress resistant. And they didn't, they scanned their brains. And what they
Mm.
found was that a specific part of this rat brain, after only 6 weeks of microdosing, or even 3 weeks, I believe, and anyways, after a short period of microdosing, actually had increased density. And increased density means that there are more connections within that specific area of the brain, which usually means that it's better at what it's supposed to do. Right? It's a better functioning little machine within the brain. Now, this part of the brain was the PVC, the paraventricular nucleus. Um, and what we know is that this part of the brain in rats is actually directly related to how rats handle stress. And we know that the same goes for people, for humans. Right? This part of the brain, the PVC, is directly related to how much stress we can endure normally. And this was really funny to me because I felt always that for me, the biggest benefit that I would gain from microdosing was being more stress resistant. Yes,
Mm.
I felt a lift in mood. Yes, I felt a lift in, well, an increase in my reflective capabilities, being more able to think outside my normal tendencies and really reflect a bit more objectively on how I was doing and how I was feeling at the time. But for me, the most helpful it's been has been in the area of stress. I know that when I'm the way that I usually use psychedelics is if I know that I'm going to go into a period of my life where stress is going to be high, that's a good moment for me to microdose because it will help me to kind of keep my head cool and go through the motions without losing too much energy.
And this is where I do love science. I'm not poo pooing science. I'm just, I like to kick the tires on it. But the brain scans is really where it gets fun for me. The EEGs and the fMRIs. And when we do the coaching calls, I take them through the fMRI scan of the brain under the influence and not under the influence. And I
Mhm.
find it such a cool scan because when you take larger doses of psilocybin, everything is sharper, colors change, smell changes, taste change, textures different. So you feel like your brain is more active. But that fMRI scan shows a great reduction in activity in all areas of the brain.
Mm.
So it's a down regulation. It's like, okay, we're just going to downshift a little bit. And I
Yeah.
believe now this is where you come in because it's all in every part of the brain. It would obviously have an impact on the amygdala fight flight response,
Mhm.
and so many people, especially those with chronic anxiety or even micro PTSD compounded, have this ringing alarm bell that you just kind of even forget is there. It's just part of you being you. And
Mm.
then finally, the psilocybin turns down the volume or turns it off altogether. So there isn't this stuckness of this alarm. And now you actually have bandwidth. So
Yeah.
you're able to listen to someone, you're able to have empathy, you're able to not be as aggressive, have road rage, be aggressive at home. You're able to find a solution to a problem that you haven't been able to figure out in weeks or months.
Mm.
You have bandwidth
Yeah.
because the alarm is lower,
Yeah. It's like,
you know?
all the stress that you experience can kind of turn into some kind of fog that is right in front of your eyes, which makes you miss things that are not too far away. You can only see what's right in front of you, and that can be really overwhelming. And it is my experience indeed that for some people, when they start microdosing, this fog just lifts, and then they go like, "Oh wow, actually, I can see quite a lot clearer now." And that doesn't make it
Mm.
easy always, right? Sometimes they see where their life isn't going the way they would want it to go, or they see where they have been lacking. Yeah, but it is.
And converse and conversely, people misunderstand that relief from not having the ringing alarm bell into euphoria, meaning I'm microdosing, but why am I not feeling anything? And it's you're confusing the euphoria of you're supposed to feel something when it's actually just relief because you're at a new baseline that is not overstimulating you for a change, you
Hmm.
know so that relief is not actually a buzz, it's not actually intoxicating because by definition you're not supposed to be buzzed or intoxicated when microdosing.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
not, I mean, you can, but it's just not microdosing. You're doing something else
Hmm.
if that's what you're doing. And it's both levers because it's like sometimes the conversations get hijacked, in various different ways. And this psychedelic renaissance it's a gold rush, and
Yeah.
it's like the floodgates are opening financially, the floodgates are opening spiritually, the floodgates are opening in terms of information. And again, it's teaching people how to curate information, teaching people how to like seek out their own information, get a second opinion, figure out what's right for them, and actually just being bold and honest about, you might not have a good trip, you need to check the ethics, triple check the studies. There's a lot of due diligence that is required of you as a
Mhm.
person or as a user, no matter which way you're going to go about it, whether you're hero dosing or
Yeah,
microdosing.
but to be fair, Asha, I mean, I agree with you, and still, it's a big thing to ask of people, right? And this is, yeah, I do think, you know, out of many of the people that come to me for guidance on microdosing, they come to me and they say, you know what, I would like for you to tell me how to do it because I wouldn't know where to start. I can start going on the internet and I can there's so many people saying slightly different things. Like, you're the expert, just tell me. And I get that. I actually really appreciate when people book sessions for that reason, because
Sure.
I think that's a really nice way of doing due diligence, right? And it's also them saying like, hey, I don't have the time or the capacity or the energy to go on on a personal journalistic approach to, I don't feel like I'm ready to do all the research. This is above my head. I would like to outsource that. And that is, in my opinion, like exactly what you and I are doing at Microdose Pro. That was at least my intention when I joined Microdose Pro, that I wanted information to be as readily available as possible, right? The right information curated by experts to find their way easily onto the computer screen of the people that had the Microdose Pro website open, because I felt like that was what was most needed. And that's also how we started doing the workshops, right? The online workshops that you are now hosting, they are for all the people that join them. I'm 100% sure that you don't need much more than one 1.5 hours in an online meeting with like-minded people to find out how microdosing works, and then you can ask all the questions that you want. You don't have to do all the work, all the research yourself. I think these are very important elements of why, for me, I love working with Microdose Pro, and I think that this is what needs to happen more. I would love for other companies to jump on the same train. I haven't seen much of them do it as of yet, which I think is a pity, because this way still many people are not receiving the right information, or any information at all, actually.
And this is the thing. Look, like the people hear me compare microdosing to chicken soup. Everybody knows what it is, but everybody has their own recipe, and so we can start with the basics. And that's what I guide people through during the coaching calls. And it's like, this is your baseline. We encourage everyone to start with the fatty band protocol, but I don't stop there. I say, this is your baseline. This is what we recommend as your first steps. And as you go through your first steps, pay attention. Your protocol might change. You might prefer to take it at night. You might prefer to take it on an empty stomach. You might want to chew instead of swallow. You might want to stack with other mushrooms. There's a whole variety of
Yeah.
possibilities in the world.
Get
The same way
acquainted.
there's soups in the world. And on a physiological level, there's one study that says your DNA can actually make you a little bit more tolerant to psilocybin and can actually affect how you process it. And that's a small population nonetheless, but everybody's physiology is unique. Everyone's medical history is unique. And measuring neuronal density is not so commonplace. It would be nice if we can have a before and after scan of our brains, but we don't. And so I teaching people, it's like, sure, you don't want to do the legwork, you want to get the short cheat sheet on how to get started. Cool. We'll get you started. This is your recommended baseline, and pay attention because I'm going to teach you to fish now.
Hmm.
You're going to have to fish now.
Yeah.
Because like first meal's on me, but like, and I think this is important, and we do have to challenge them
Yeah.
because it's not scalable otherwise. It just doesn't work.
No, challenge them and make sure that there's a place for people to find us whenever they feel like they need to. I think the majority of people will probably be, either good on their own or willing to do a bit of research. But there's also as many people. I think for many people, it's also part of a part of anxiety that you must imagine. There's still microdosing or psychedelics in general. Like for many people, are drugs and not the medicine type of drugs that we know them of in English, but the drugs that we put them in the same category as amphetamines and cocaine.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not true for you and I, but it is true for many people. And there's so many people that I see for microdosing that say, I've never used drugs in my life, so I don't know, and they're scared. Right? They're willing to do it. They're open to the experience. They're willing to go through it because they feel like, I've been trying many things in order to improve my mental health, and it hasn't been giving me the results that I've been hoping for. So I'm gonna take this risk, which is actually quite big of a risk for someone who is, a bit anxious and doesn't really know what to expect, and they've never done any mind altering substances before. They don't like to drink. They don't smoke. They jump into something like this. Of course, it's scary as hell, right? And these people probably wouldn't be comforted enough by one article saying, take it twice a week, try out how much you need, and you're good to go. No.
No,
And
but
and
when
besides that, I have to say, and I think this comes back to what I said about the earlier this talk about neuroplasticity and the importance of providing people with a container for that, for making the best out of their experience with preparation and integration, and making sure that this flexible brain stretches out the right way instead of the wrong way. Um, and this is something that I have been actually quite surprised to see, because I've been doing therapy with people who are microdosing alongside my usual therapy clients, and this is my personal experience, but I see a difference. I see a difference in how easily people pick up new concepts, new trains of thought, and new ways of looking at what your thoughts and feelings are. And yeah, because of that, I'm very happy that not everybody does this by themselves at home, but that there are people that say, hey, I want to have a structured approach to this. I'm going to find myself some guidance. Then they end up with, oh, you or me. And I'm very thankful for that. I do see lots of added benefit if people do take that route.
Oh, 100%. And look, I'm not advocating that they must completely do it in utter isolation, not in the least. There's a beautiful quote randomly that I saw in a Beyonce documentary, strangely. But the quote was it was her Coachella documentary, but I digress. The quote said, "Without community, there's no liberation."
Mm, yeah.
You know, and I believe that. I'm very specific about community, and the whole each one teach one, and being there for them and answering questions. So it's not about being in isolation at all. It's more of a reminder,
Mm,
you know, and to not necessarily take anyone's word for it because it may or may not be appropriate.
yeah.
We don't know everybody's medical history. Um, and again, to kind of reiterate on what the competition is and is not doing, there's a lot of competition out there that they'll just sell mushroom chocolates or capsules, and they're a default X amount of dosage. And sometimes you know what the strain is, and sometimes you don't. And there might be fillers, and we don't know. And,
Mm,
and genius part of Microdose Pro, the three little musketeers, bless their hearts, they the fact that they really went in with the fatty man protocol, focusing on the sweet spot, was an absolute genius idea, because that really is where it matters.
Yeah.
Gino spoke about the fact that until he figured out his sweet spot, he didn't understand what the whole microdosing fuss was about, because he didn't like it, because he was taking too much. He was taking too much, and he was above his range, and he felt intoxicated and woozy, and he's like, I don't get the fuss. Until he started playing with the sweet spot. And again, no one can tell you what your sweet spot is.
I
With
had
all
the
the love and
I had a similar experience. Like my first time microdosing, I was too cautious. I felt like, okay, this is a dose that I'm comfortable with. I feel something. I feel, like this is doing something for me. And then the last day of my 2 month cycle, I was like, you know what? I have a little bit left. I'm going to take just a little bit extra. And it wasn't much. It was just a little bit extra. And I felt that day like, oh, whoa, this actually makes a lot of a difference, like a big difference for me. I had
completely.
the best day in a month, in 2 months. What the hell? And when we started out, there was no guide. There was no
No.
information. The internet was slim. All we had was the third wave, I believe.
Yeah.
And that was
Well,
it.
we're millennial. Well, I'm a Gen Z. I'm a Gen X, but you're millennials. We had to lead the way and teach ourselves many, many things. Many, many, many things.
Very true. Yeah. Yeah.
But the dose does definitely make the difference. And also, one of the articles I'm going to write about soon, and we don't have the science on this, and I wish we had a way to measure neuronal density. But anecdotally, what we're seeing is that the sweet spot dose tends to drop on the second cycle. Now, my uneducated opinion, that no one necessarily is asking for, is but here I am volunteering it to anyone who will listen, is back to the neurogenesis and neuroplasticity. So many alterations and optimizations have been made. New connections from A to B are made. Connections between B and C are optimized, trimmed, enhanced, whatever the case is. That if you start with dose X in your first cycle, you could end up with a lower dose on your second cycle, because a lot of the infrastructure repair on the synaptic connections have already been done and already been optimized. And so you might not need as much. Now, this is me in very layman's opinion and training. But we don't know that because we're not scanning brains before and after. But this
Hmm.
is what I'm guessing is going on. And so when people say, oh, I've just done my second cycle, it kind of feels weird. It was the same dose. Why am I feeling weird? Drop it still. And again, that's what happened with Gino. He started with a certain amount and then he dropped it by like 75% on his second cycle. So he started with zero point 0.8 and ended up at 0.2,
Yeah.
which is a huge difference.
Yeah.
And these are the parts where science hasn't caught up to yet.
No. No. There's no. It's true. Yeah. I mean, but get used to science. It takes a while.
I know, but it does take a while. But continuing on with the citizen scientists' work, we need to keep the hype going so we
Yeah.
can get the science.
Yeah. True.
You know,
Very true.
if you had to answer as either a person or as a clinician, how would you define microdosing? Microdosing is. How would you finish that?
Oh, I feel like I'm inclined to just give the definition that I always use, which is by saying microdosing is taking, you know, small amounts of a psychedelic substance a few times a week in order to help you work with your mental health or work with productivity. Um, However, for me personally, I now that you ask me the question, I do feel like that is kind of lacking some form of depth. And I think I would like to rephrase it a little bit and say that microdosing is a way to maybe help you explore parts of yourself that need exploring. And it's a tool that can help you get a bit further in your process of, becoming more you. Because I think this is basically what most of therapy, at least, is about. It's becoming more you. It's what we call self actualization or individualization. And um, yeah, in my experience, like my personal experience and my experience in giving therapy, aided by microdosing, I feel like this is what it helps you to do, to get a bit more closer to what actually matters to you, to kind of get rid of the fog and open some doors.
Yeah, because the technical official definition I find is incomplete. Again,
It's
in my
kind of
very
lame,
layman.
isn't it? To keep,
Huh?
and it's kind of boring as well to keep speaking in all these technical terms the entire time. I mean, to be fair, I kind of have to, right? It's I have an
Better
academic
you than
background. I am inclined to read studies and get enthusiastic by them, but at the same time, um, it's not very accessible. And like I said, it lacks a certain depth, right?
because the current definition is taking a fraction of a psychoactive substance that is lower than would cause a psychedelic effect or experience.
Yeah,
That's the definition at the
yeah, and
moment.
probably it has something like sub-perceptual as well,
Yeah,
which is also
conceptual
kind
data.
of define sub-perceptual. What are you not perceiving? Is it not having visual hallucinations? Is that sub-perceptual? If that's true, then yes, microdosing is sub-perceptual usually. However, I'm not supposed to feel anything. If that's the case, then it doesn't really make sense to start microdosing, right? Other than using it as a nootropic. So you are supposed to feel something, but then it's not sub-perceptual anymore. I agree with you. That definition is kind of incomplete in my book.
Yeah, because it doesn't and furthermore, it doesn't mention how often you take it, which is not every day.
Yeah.
So it's the intermittent use for a limited amount of time.
Mhm.
So you're not taking it for weeks and months into the future for the benefit or the intention of personal improvement and or symptom management.
Yeah.
I find that to be a lot more complete, and in a more layman's translation, it's kind of like getting your upgrade by optimizing your relationship with the things you should stop and your relationship with the things you should be starting. There's a physiological optimization that happens via nootropics like psilocybin that allows you to really become another version of yourself. And it's subtle but potent. So you don't need to feel anything. But if you pay attention, a lot of people are like, I've been microdosing for 3 weeks. I don't notice anything. Are you sure this is working? And what I often tell them is ask the people around you. Or in men's cases, ask your wife. She'll tell you. And then the wife is like, well, actually, thank you for bringing it up, because
Way to
people will
generalize,
notice.
but
The
I'm
thing
kidding.
is,
I'm
this thing,
kidding. I'm kidding.
it's
You
very
know,
subtle but very potent.
there's this saying in Dutch. Uh, we talk about the wind in the rug, like having the Dutch are always on their bicycle, right? And if you've got a long trip to make on your bike, and you get the wind from the front, it's horrible. Like it costs you so much energy. If there's no wind at all, perfect. But when you're really lucky, you see if you've got the wind in the back. Kind of gives you
Sure.
a gentle push. You still have to work the
Yeah, yeah.
pedals, you still have to do the bicycle riding, but at the same time, it makes it easier. And I feel like microdosing kind of does that for a lot of processes.
It optimizes your aerodynamics. Yes. A
Yeah,
lot less drag.
it's a little push in the back. Just it helps you keep going. You're in the right direction. Keep on going. Yeah.
Speaking of keeping on going, what's on your bookshelf these days? What keeps you going?
Yeah, you've asked me this to prepare this
Sure.
before the talk, and I brought them with me here. This is on my
Dun, dun,
bookshelf.
dun. The Zaire. Okay, very good. Tell us
Yeah,
about them.
I've
Unpack it for
been
us.
quite busy reading. I'm going to start off with these ones, these three books. I'm doing another course in schema therapy, which is a therapy module, like a way of doing therapy that focuses more on, like, for me usually I work with acceptance and commitment therapy, and acceptance and commitment therapy, its basic premise is about learning that thoughts and feelings come as they are, and trying to find ways to not resist them as much and instead accept them, letting go of all the tension that comes from not wanting something, and at the same time putting a focus on what are my values, what's the type of person that I want to be, and with the extra room for movement that you have, if you are able to accept your thoughts and feelings as they are, and you're not losing so much energy on fighting them, then you can put that energy towards creating the life that you want, and acting like the person that you would like to be. And I love that way of working. I think it's like works for almost everything that people bring into the therapy room, whether it is really difficult struggles and the big topics in life, or whether it's like, yeah, I don't like my job, I don't like my boss, I don't know how to deal with this. Act like acceptance and commitment therapy works really well for all of it. And I found that for some people, there's some subjects that really trigger something, that really, open some kind of Pandora's box. And schema therapy is a structured approach to kind of unpacking what is there within the psyche, unpacking where certain core beliefs come from, what happened in your childhood, what was the relationship with your caregivers, and what major life events have you had that kind of shape the spectacles that you view the world with, and how do you respond to the world through those spectacles, and can we kind of dismantle that a bit. So that's what schema therapy is about. It's really, I really love this way of working as well, and this is my continued education. So that's chemotherapy. This is basically study. Then I have informative. This book is called
Okay.
Range. It's written by David Epstein, and the subtitle is Why Generalists Triumph in a Specialized World. And it's basically a whole manifesto saying that you should not want to be an early specializer. Instead, you want to have experiences from different domains, do what you like at the moment. If you don't like it anymore, just quit. And I think it really, captures something that many people struggle with. I see many people that come when they are in a shift of career, like 30, 40, 50-year olds that say, hey, I'm going to do something completely else. I've been working in IT. I want to, I don't know, paint houses. And then they feel like they are losing something, losing their specialization, losing all the time they've put into one area, and they're gonna, it's gonna be worthless once they move on. And in this book, you get like thousands of different examples and reasons why it's actually way better to not specialize too much, or if you do specialize, to also keep working with different kinds of things in order to keep you sharp, in order to be able to think outside of the box. Like one example that he gives is that um, Nobel Prize winners are 22 times as likely than the average population to have one hobby that includes either music or other types of art. They say because they have their specialization, but they have some interest in a completely unrelated
Mm,
field, and that kind of keeps them open, keeps them fresh, keeps the knowledge transfers across domains. And I think you can already see it makes me enthusiastic already, and I actually feel a lot of recognition in this book because I've been doing lots of different things. Been doing lots of different things. Like I never started off at university of psychology wanting to do something with clinical psychology. I had completely different plans. My initial plan was to do a was to be an organizational psychologist. I thought it would be kick ass to be really good at giving trainings and having teams, train teams to function better. Turns out I hated it. The first courses I had it, I was like, oh man, this is the most boring stuff ever. And I had this little breakdown. I was like, oh, I picked the complete wrong study. I should have done economics. And then I had this course in biopsychology. That was the first course that went on about hormones and neurotransmitters and synapses. And I was like, oh, this is awesome. You know? Yeah, and of course, like I said, being a security guard, scaffolding, building stages, doing that kind of stuff. I traveled a lot. I just spent some time not working at all and mostly surfing and learning to. I don't know. I built my own camper van, picking up different skills here and there, and I really feel like it enables me to relate better to the people that I see in my therapy room as well. Um,
100%. And it's like I said to you guys in a previous conversation, the biggest compliment I can give someone is if they have range. And even during my podcast with Gino, the book I was reading is Bittersweet, but at the time was with Susan Cain, and it talks about the whole range of like you can't really access a certain level of joy without actually being honest about your sadness and your grief, and how it's not one or the other, it's both, and if you're
mhm.
paying attention. And I really, for me, range is very, very important. I also saw a YouTube video on South by Southwest talking about AI. And the guy was really funny. He was like, for the 40, 50-year olds that were jack of all trades their entire lives and never had a focus, now is your time to be a prompt engineer, not the specialists. Because to be a prompt engineer, which is boku bucks and a very revered job and a great thing to look into, the people that do have this wide experience of life are the optimal ones to become prompt engineers. And I personally joke that I think I'm on career number 7 minimum in my personal life.
You're doing
You
you're doing very well by my standards. Yeah.
you know, like I wanted to be a cop when I was in high school. In my early 20s, I didn't even eat button mushrooms because I didn't like how squidgy they are. So I never ate mushrooms at all. Um, then I studied hotel management and I was upset with the course because they included nutrition. And I was like, I'm not here for nutrition. I'm here for hotel management, and then you fast forward 20 years and I'm all about nutrition and I'm all about mushrooms and I'm all about,
Mm,
so it's very interesting the places that you've been and the places you'll go.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
As
Try,
it says.
and I think this book is like it's basically saying try not to have everything set out. And I
Yeah.
think that that's a really beautiful lesson because that's what I thought I had to have everything planned out and to have a goal that I could pursue and I could plan on how to get there. And basically, maybe that's kind of a waste of time sometimes. And it's better
The
to go
universe
with
does
the
not
flow.
work.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
She
Yeah, and
will.
then the last book that I'm reading, like I try to always because I kind of tend to get stuck in all these informative books, like full. This is filled with scientific studies as well, and I love it. But I also need something to kind of wind down. This is what I read when I'm in bed, and this is
I can't see. Lift it up a little bit. Oh, the Paulo Coelho. Yeah. Okay. I haven't read that one. What's
Yeah,
that story?
the Zahir. It's a beautiful story. I feel like it's kind of autobiographical as well. It's about a writer who has difficulties in life, and then all of a sudden finds himself being a very accomplished writer after having written a book in 2 weeks, which is what happened to Paulo Coelho when he writ when he wrote The Alchemist. And yeah, this writer's his wife all of a sudden disappears, and then the whole story is about him either coming to terms with that or needing to find a way to do something about it. And yeah, it's really nice.
It's listen, everybody wants their download, everybody wants their cup of tea with Jesus, but it takes integration. So the Zahir is probably a book on integrating the download,
It
you
is,
know?
and you know the way Paulo Coelho writes is beautiful.
It's beautiful.
He finds this way to make the most mundane turn into something like a beautiful reflection on life. And
Yes.
I really enjoy those kinds of things. I feel like the same happened in oh no, I forgot the name of the book. I'll find it later.
Okay.
It will
Well,
come to
I'm
me.
reading years ago. I'll tell you two books. So years ago, I somehow found out, and I didn't know this, that the Nobel Prize in each category, because there's obviously several categories, doesn't always get given out every year. So, case in point, the Nobel Prize in Literature. If there's no one commendable that year to Nobel Prize status, they won't give one out that year in literature. And I was like, that's amazing, right? Like immediate integrity bump. I
Yeah.
thought that's really cool. So this is years and years ago. So I go on the Nobel Prize website to see, okay, so who did make the cut? And I scroll down and I somehow ended up on Hermann Hesse and Siddhartha, and he won
Mm.
the prize in 46 for it. So off I go. I get this book. I don't know what it's about, but I need to read it because I need to understand what the Nobel Prize gets handed out for. Now it's my most favorite book of all time.
I love Siddhartha.
It's ah, I'm telling you, I have read it several times. I have listened to it, like all the things. I love it. It's absolutely magical, from the moment when he refuses to leave his father's bedroom without his blessing to the moment when he leaves his wife and child. He really speaks about having a full range life in between. And after that full range life and not taking anyone's verbal dogma, he's looking for his experience. I'm not going to take your word for it. I'm
Mm.
going to have my experience. That's when he sits under the tree and has his own experience. But the whole arch had to take place, and how many people he had to leave his best friend behind, and he had to like always leave things behind. So it's like going into a new world, getting out of that new world, going into another new world, getting out of that, and it's my favorite book of all time. And now I'm reading another Nobel Prize winner, Herta Mueller, and she won it in 2019. And this is a particularly special book that I have to read in small bites because her writing is so tight and so concise. She is a Romanian living in Germany, and this book is about communist Romania and what it was like in the last few years of
Mm.
Ceausescu's reign. And obviously, I'm from Romania. We left before Ceausescu fell. We left about 7 years before. So in 82, he fell in 89. So I watched the last few years from a distance, but I'm just going to read you a very short paragraph. She writes, people who looked up from the street and saw little spots of white high among the windows didn't know that they were petunias, thought that they were seeing children's socks or handkerchiefs fluttering in the summer breeze all the way into the fall. Like, there's so much in such a few there's such a beautiful economy of words and such a craft of words that just like that, like I can spend 10 minutes thinking about that.
I love it. It's so poetic. You kind of envision it as well, right?
You can totally see it. So I have to read it slowly just to take in the paint, how she's painting it. And it's a difficult subject. But yeah, no, kudos to her. And it's called The Fox Was Ever the Hunter. So very appropriate for a communist book. um, so yeah, thank you so much for your time. It's been so much fun unpacking all this with you. We talk about all kinds of things, but we don't necessarily have an opportunity to talk about these things at such a
Mm,
depth. So, this was very, very fun for me. And I really appreciate you taking the time during the holidays to sit with me and have this conversation.
of course, Asha. Thank you so much for inviting me. And yeah, this was a lot of fun for me as well. Yeah.
And thank you. You're one of my secret mentors from a distance. You and Jamie Wheel. I silently take notes from a distance in my own private way, and so thank you for that. I very much have so much respect for you and the work that you do. And like I said, I do take notes and I do emulate to the best of my untrained ability. But it's an absolute pleasure to know you personally and professionally. And thank you for everything that you do, because I know that aside from your clinical work, you really contribute to many communities in many special ways. And so, on behalf of them and myself and the Microdose Pro team, thank you.
Thank you so much, Asha. You're making me blush a little bit.
Okay, good. Good. Why not?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It doesn't happen too often, but yeah, wow. Thank you very much. I just want to say that I'm really happy to have the opportunity to sit here and have this conversation with you. I'm so happy to have been working with you and the rest of the team at Microdose Pro for such a long time already, and to see the way that everybody evolves and the way that we do our work changes for the better, I believe. And yeah, I wouldn't want this any other way, really.
Yes, the spores are sporing through us.
I think they are. I think they are. Thank you so much, Asha.
Thank you. Thank you. Chat soon. Thank you. Bye.